Well, folks, this is going to be a ripper, leading your best life today, because I'm with an old mate, Richard Craney. He swims with us in Pod Squad, but he said to me, he told me a story based on a book that he's written. Craney, welcome aboard, and we're going to talk about this book because of her, the inspirational story of a woman who became my mother. So, mate, we've got a lot to talk about here today, right?
We do, and thanks first of all, Leigh, for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate the time that you've put aside for this. And I could talk about my grandmother all day, but I'll be as concise as possible. I'll just answer the questions that you have, Leigh. But really happy to keep my grandmother, which effectively is my mother's life alive as long as possible. So given she was born in 1909, that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly, mate. Well, look, this all came about because I can't remember. We were talking one morning at Pod Squad about life or the journey, and I think it may have been also linked to our Blokes Talk Beachside men's mental health group, where we say everybody's going through something, and then you started to elaborate on your story. So maybe, Craney, do you want to start with why did you go about writing this book? Let's start with that question.
Yeah,
which might lead into your background as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, Leigh. I guess I never actually meant to write a book for public consumption. That's the first thing I'll say. I actually wrote it simply for the family because what my main motivation was, my wife, Nancy, and I have had 3 children who are now grown up in their 30s and early 30s. And it kind of sort of irritated me, or it didn't sit well with me that they'd never really had a real relationship with their great-grandmother, who was my grandmother, who ended up being my mother. So I wanted to actually put the story down so that they knew that they'd have some comfort. As we've spoken before, there's great power in stories, and I really wanted my kids to be able to grow up and to let their kids know that there's this woman in their lineage that's actually pretty powerful, pretty resilient, and just a beautiful human being.
Mm-hmm. And talk about resilience. We'll get onto that. Well, look. The question I always ask people is, look, tell us a bit about your background and your journey. So where has Richard Crane come from? And obviously that'll lead into the story, but tell us a bit about your background and your journey from where you started to where you are now.
Sure. Born very proud Perth person, born and bred in WA in Perth. I came from a working class background, as you'll find out, particularly if you read the book. And raised in Belmont, pretty tough working class area to be raised in. I was really fortunate to be born into a good family, really fortunate to fall into good friendships along the way, and generally speaking, just been pretty lucky, I guess, through the course of my life. But the two central people who really helped me out were my grandmother when my brother and I were in a pretty tough space, and my dad's best mate, who is now 94 years old. He has a bit of dementia, and we're looking after him in the retirement home at the minute. But they stepped in at a time when my brother and I were really struggling a bit in terms of our circumstances in our early life.
Oh, absolutely, mate. You were very young. So just on that, I think we've probably come across each other in our phys ed days. So you were part of the Rob Brown, Peter O'Connell squad, Brian Dawson's squad, weren't you? And did you know Brian from that part of the world? Did you know Brian Dawson before that as well?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Brian Dawson, for those people who are listening on who don't know, he's a Belmont boy. We were in school together. We played school football together. We then went to Swans and played at Swans together. We went to university together, did the same course, and travelled together, and we're at each other's weddings, all that sort of thing. So lifelong friendships. And Dawson and I still have a bit of a paddle every Friday morning on the Swan River or out on the ocean somewhere. So lifetime friends. And he's probably the smartest bloke in the room most times. He doesn't say much, but what he does by deeds. And he's a classic example of when I say I had great luck. I fell into very good, strong friendships in that university group and other groups I've been associated with. So I think we can get really lucky at times with just the people we meet along the journey, and Brian Dawson's certainly one of those.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. Well, let's start to talk about the story, because I think I remember somehow in there when we were talking, you started to mention about the fact that your grandmother had had 4 or 5 deaths in a very short period of time. So let's just talk about we're talking about resilience, because on the back of the book you say, when someone dies, it doesn't have to be the end of the story. Because of her is the true story of a remarkable woman and her determination to raise a family against the odds, warm, witty, and written with deep gratitude. Because of her gently reminds us of the power of family, and that sometimes the greatest challenge is life itself. So let's just talk about that kind of trigger for our conversation of the 4 deaths that occurred in that short period of time that your grandmother had to deal with, and then what that meant for you.
Sure. So my grandmother, as I said, was born in 1909. She married a returned serviceman from World War I. He was a digger. He did 4 years of hard yards in France and Middle East. They had 7 kids, and then he re-enlisted for World War II, put his name down to go into World War II. So she was at that stage stuck with 7 kids in a place in Belmont, with all the boys were out in the back tent and the girls were inside the house. And then he came back. He had some health issues when he was away. He came back, and she ended up with 10 children. So she had 10 of her own kids. She was disappointed that she didn't beat 13 because the mother had 13. So very competitive family. And just prior to me being born, she lost her mother, her brother, her husband, her daughter, and his son-in-law in the space of 4 years. So already she was under, as you can appreciate, carrying a fair bit of grief, and in addition, having lost her husband, she still got her 10 kids. And one of those deaths of her daughter was my mother and my father as well. So she took my brother and myself in when I was 3 years old, and we're living in a 2-bedroom house in Belmont with a sleep out the back. And for the first 2 or 3 years, I was sleeping in a rolled out bed at the foot in her bedroom. So she certainly did it really tough on a war widow's pension for many years.
Incredible. Now let's just deal with this. I'm trying to remember the order of events. Did your mother go before your father, or your father before your mother?
They were in the rental.
Your father went first, right? Because
he did, yeah.
Yes, and that was, if I remember correctly, he was working 2 or 3 jobs, and he was coming home in the car. Or you tell the story of where it happened and how it happened.
Yeah, well, they just come back from the sharecropping up in Three Springs, and they just had come home. I was born. They were in a rental, and he went off for his 3rd job on a Saturday night at the Trots. He was driving home, and at that stage, the house with my grandmother was only 1 kilometre away from where we were in the rental. And on the way home, he hit a light pole and passed away. And the first person on the scene was my eldest uncle, who was living next door to my grandmother, because he hit the pole literally 60 metres away from their house. So he heard the lights went out. He ran across, and of course the person he saw was his brother-in-law, who was dead in the cab. So then my grandmother had to go and knock on the door, which was 1 kilometre away where we were sleeping and where my mother was, and give my mother the sad news. So at that stage, I was 17 months, and my brother was 11 months older than I was. He was only 20, barely 2. Oh, so that's how it all started. And then the epilogue of that is that Ken, my dad was called Ken. Ken's best mate, Jeff, who my brother was named after, was travelling around Australia. He was in Darwin at the time, couldn't come back for the funeral because the planes didn't fly at that stage. But as soon as he finished his work contract, he came down to check in on us and mum. And after a period of 18 months or so, he proposed to my mum, and they got married. So they married on my 3rd birthday, and they were married for 4 weeks when mum was diagnosed with leukemia, and she passed away 8 weeks later. So basically, I think they had 3 months together. 2 months were basically with her convalescing and ultimately dying.
Oh my God! Talk about resilience, trauma. Somewhere in there, of course, Craney, you carry that. I'm sure you know that. Then, of course, you make the point in the book. Of course, you essentially went past that pole almost every day.
Yeah. Well, back in the old, because I'm being over 60 now, back in the old days when you used to go to the shop, you used to either ride your bike or or as a young tacky, you'd walk. And because my grandmother had no car, we'd all do all the errands down to the shops down at Belvedere Street in Belmont. And there was the ironic thing was there was this lamp pole. It was still there, but I didn't realise. No one told us because we're too young that was the light pole that our dad actually had hit. And ironically, when I've learned later on as a teenager that was the pole, I realised that was the one I used to hide behind this Doberman that used to jump the fence and used to try and savage us. So we'd be trying to hide behind the light pole and trying to make our getaway. So it was kind of ironic that the pole was serving to protect us all those years after having a not so great encounter with my father.
Unbelievable, mate. Now, another part of the book, which I found, very poignant and moving, was the day you were driving past, was it Clontarf or the orphanage, and you put two and two together that had it not been for your grandmother, you could have been in there. Can you just elaborate on that? I can't recall the details specifically there.
Yeah, well, back in the days, we used to have these things called Sunday drives, and so my uncles, one of the boys, would have come across and say, "We'll go for a drive, Mum." And we're going down Manning there, and I saw this big ominous-looking building on the left-hand side as we're driving past, and I saw Clontarf, which seemed like a strange name. So I just asked, "Nan, what's that building down there?" And she said, "Well, that's where all the poor people who don't have family, young children who don't have family go." And then, of course, she didn't think anything more about it. And I'm just watching this ominous house slide past into the background. I'm thinking, well, that could have been us had we not have had someone step in and do a great job looking after us. So gratitude is, I guess, if you had one word in which to kind of talk about the book, I think gratitude would be the word that comes to mind first and foremost.
And as you say, she didn't drive, and so you say the family, was it every Saturday or every Sunday, used to come by? So I just want to talk about some of those family events and how that kind of shaped you.
You read the book very well, Leigh. I'm very impressed that you've taken so much in. But Saturdays,
note all of the markers there, mate. So when I see, there's a lot of blue mark and a lot of. So don't worry, I read it all right. You challenged me. I rose to the challenge. So tell me about those family gatherings and the impact they were on you.
As a kid, Saturdays were my favourite day because that's when the family would all drop in, because she couldn't come to the family, and everyone knew that she'd have scones on the table and she'd have ham sandwiches and ham and mustard sandwiches, which was always the key morning tea on the table. And so as a result, because I have 20 cousins on my grandmother's side, because she had 10 kids and they all propagated. So there'd just be a mess of kids, and you'd be kids under the table, and it was a tiny little kitchen. We've just had our kitchen renovated, and I can't believe how big kitchens are these days and how intricate. We had a wood stove, one single sink, and a little tiny table, and we used to have, it would be jam-packed every single Saturday because there'd be kids under the table, kids running around. And you really had to work hard to sneak in and grab a biscuit or grab a hot scone off the table. But there was so much joking and so much life that it was just a fantastic family to be a part of.
And just on that, let's talk about the role of football or sport in that big family, and for you in particular.
Yeah, well, as it's not uncommon, I guess, in tough neighbourhoods that people, sport is it's a meritocracy in that, if you're good enough at it, you can kind of find your way. So footy was the thing that I gravitated towards, and Brian Dawson and I shared that in common. So we were kind of mates in that department. He was a much better footballer, and he'll tell you that anyway himself. And I wasn't I wasn't very good in the end, but I was good enough to have a dream, and that was good enough for me. And I was good enough to fail at it, which had its own lessons, I suppose. But my uncles in particular were very keen for us to somehow get involved in sport, because the older uncles, so Claude and Kerry and Bob particularly, were very good boxers. And in fact, they're all champion boxers. So Bob was a teenage Golden Gloves champion. Kerry was a champion of the Navy and used to be selected to represent the Navy against the Air Force and the Army when he was in Sydney, and that was considered a professional league.
Mm.
And Claude, of course, who the eldest one was, he's in the WA Amateur Boxing Hall of Fame, and he was both the WA light middleweight champion for both amateur and professional. He turned professional later on, and he just turned professional and was offered a gig in the United States, but he was just starting his business up here, so he couldn't take it on board. So they were very, very hard, competitive, but also very compassionate people, so they were great mentors for two young blokes like my brother and I to have as we were growing up.
Well, let's talk about that, because one of the questions revolves around the mentoring, and obviously let's talk about male mentoring. But these guys with the gloves, does that mean they got you in the gloves and taught you a few things as well?
Yeah, it was very handy, because particularly again back in those days, there wasn't a lot of resources available, particularly if you're being bullied. And the first thing that my uncles were very keen to tell me is that if they ever found out that in any level that we'd been bullying someone else, that we'd have them to answer to, and that wasn't going to be a good thing. So they were very compassionate and very clear on, you don't pick on people who might be weaker than you, or pick on anyone. You don't pick fights. That was absolutely instilled in us. But the follow-up was, if you're ever picked on, or if you're ever bullied, you deal with it. You don't whinge to the school. You don't whinge to your grandmother. You come to us if you need a little bit of help, but you sort out your own business. And it did come to pass that was a handy resource to have at different times. So yeah, they'd have us out the back doing boxing. In the end, I worked out that I didn't have a killer instinct. It wasn't my go, and I'd much rather chase a football around than try and get involved in fighting people. And I remember at the age of 15, I came to the conclusion that I was a pacifist, and I wasn't going to hit anyone after the age of 15, because I'd just been involved in a fight at school. I won the fight, but I just thought, this is not the way to move forward.
Yeah, sure. But there's a whole lot of things in there. One is, we talk about boys and male mentoring, and when does the boy become a man, and the whole concept. Look, just in those things you've said that your uncles told you around, you don't bully, or you're going to have us to answer for. So in terms of that pecking order in the village, because often we see, and particularly in the western suburbs, some of the boys are very much mollycoddled. I mean, we're in the water polo club, and we see alpha mums doing a marvelous job looking after the kids, but at the end of the day, the boys end up a little bit mollycoddled versus the male influence, and that the whole concept of the village of pulling your head in, looking after your mates, all of these values that are so important in terms of being a good citizen. I'm immediately thinking there about Brian Cook at Geelong, when one of the core values at the Geelong Footy Club was, you can be a great player, but if you're a dickhead and not a good citizen, we will move you on. So there's all those values that, in traditional society, the boys are taken away from their mothers for 2 months or 3 months to become young men and warriors, and what the responsibility is. And obviously in that tough area you were in, your uncles, between the boxing and the football club, and even then, even though you decided to be a pacifist, the very fact that you knew how to look after yourself, if some guy was pulling a stunt on you, is way better than not knowing how to look after yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And having said that, the uncles they were strong, they were tough, but I have to say the strongest person in the tribe was Edna Walsh, I remember her both. Not just, I can't remember it in primary school, but when we transitioned from primary school to secondary school, she told us both, don't ever come to me complaining about what the teachers do. If they consider you're to be punished, then you're to be punished. If you come back and you complain at home, you'll get more at home. There was absolutely no quarter for sympathy if she felt we transgressed, and she had total faith in the school to actually discipline us as appropriate. And back in those days, I have to say, like an example would be, if you were caught fighting, it didn't matter if a bully was attacking me and I was remonstrating, whatever the case might be, it was automatically 6 of the best. You get 3 on the hand, 3 on that hand, and there was no questions asked. They didn't want to know the story. That was just the end of the deal. And there was a time when I actually got belted by a teacher with a sawn-off cricket bat, and he belted 19 kids because he slipped over and got some dirt on his shirt. And it's a pretty funny story now. It wasn't too funny at the time. Yeah. And I was more than annoyed. I was outraged, really, that because I was an innocent bystander, but he's belted me none the same because I wouldn't dob on who the person was. But at no time did I go home and say, "Oh, look, I've been mistreated at school," because that just wouldn't have got any traction at all. But,
well, as you say, she was very clear on her values in there, and as you say, that's one of the key values that she instilled in you guys. In terms of her mentoring, what are some of the other lessons that she put into your belief system, into your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that, and thanks for the interview, because it's caused me to sort of percolate on that a little bit more, I guess. And I think one of the things for me that I never even realised that I had at the time was the value I place on the opinion of women, because it seemed to me as a young kid growing up, and even as a teenager, that she knew everything. She knew everything that was going on in the family. She knew what was kind of going on in her neighbourhood, and she always seemed right. And so inevitably, and the respect that everyone else showed her, it was like, you need to listen to women, because there are some things, I think, for young men particularly, or even grown men, where we don't know what we don't know. We can't see what we can't see. But it seems to me that somehow she embedded an appreciation of what women see, and about what women that they see solutions where sometimes men don't. So I think that's one of the great things I think that she gave us, was an appreciation that you really need to listen to the women in your tribe.
And I'm just by random turning to page 101. I made the note, know and mean it, when she said, after a cup of tea and listening to her troubles, Gran put her cup down and firmly said, "Listen, dear, you just have to say no, mean it, and follow through with it. He will soon fall into line." Do you want to just talk about that story?
Yeah, well, that was the case where a young woman, or middle-aged woman, probably a woman in her 30s or early 40s, something like that, came to her because she was having some issues with her young boy, who was becoming a 16-year-old, and he actually started to use physical force against her. Yeah. And so she not only did that, but she also sent one of her sons over to have a chat with that young boy, and the interesting thing was, and they lived about a kilometre away. She asked, let's call him son. He was child 10, so she said to number 10, "I want you to go around and sort that fellow out, because he's been knocking Madam X around." So
the son was knocking the mother around, or the husband was knocking the wife around?
No, the son.
You're right. Okay. Yep.
And so she's asked her younger son to go around and sort that out. And as she's about to go out the door, and he knew exactly what the plan was, to make it very clear to this 16-year-old boy, this is not the way to go. She said, "Gord," she said, "wait for a sec, take the 2 boys with you." So Jeffrey, my brother, and I had to tag along. So, and I thought about that years later, and in the end, there was no physical violence at all, but he basically grabbed the fellow and just made it very clear, if this happens again, I'll be back. And the 16-year-old boy was in tears. And because my brother and I were about 11 and 12, I think there was a kind of like a double penalty there. He was being criticised, he was being remonstrated with by this older man, but at the same time, there were 2 younger boys in the tribe who saw the whole thing. So there's kind of like a double punishment there for him. And I didn't realise the wisdom of what she did, because in one foul swoop, she not just solved the problem with that boy, but she also said to a young Richard and to a young Jeffrey, the 2 young boys, this is how we roll in this family in relation to women. You don't knock women around. You respect women. So,
mate, what a beautiful piece of life teaching that she did there. And look, and literally, I've seen this just in recent times as the young kid that lives close, and the single mother across the road from us here, and he in front of me and my grandson, trying to push past his mother. And I can see he's putting on a show that I'm separate from my mother. And of course, this is a discussion I've had with when we did we were both at UWA together. Jeff Watson got me involved with this Rappaport research from England, and Rappaports were talking about the relationship between family, work, and leisure, but also the life cycle that we go through, and in those teenage years. Where the teenager wants to essentially grow wings and fly the coop to prove that they're actually independent. And obviously, even at a younger age, the boy wants to show, I don't need my mother. I'm a man, or on my way to being a man. And some of this behavior is acting that out. And again, in the absence of a strong male influence to say, mate, that's not on, the mother at times tries to talk their way through it. And it's sometimes talking's not the answer. It's literally giving the guy a teaching experience like that, which, there's no physical, but he gets the message loud and clear that it's unacceptable behavior, and to pull your testosterone in. And so what a marvelous teaching point, again, coming back to this principle of how do we help young men become not necessarily warriors, but men with strong values of their role and responsibility to women, their role and responsibility to the tribe, their role and responsibility to themselves, all of those things. Mate, what I was surprised with in the book was you are at times very Mark Twainish, very Shakespearean. Did you surprise yourself? I think you make a point somewhere in the book about surprising yourself at your literary ability in putting all this together. Give me a comment on that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Before I do, I'd just like to pick up on that really important point you mentioned before about, and just to be fair to that 16-year-old boy who was acting out in inappropriate ways, you're dead right. It was because his father was missing in action, because he was a gambler, and there's a lot going on in his life. So you're right. It is important that the older people in the tribe, the older men in the tribe, do role model appropriate kind of interactions with the family, and particularly with women. Very kind words. Thanks very much about comparing me to Shakespeare. I'm not sure that my English teacher would actually agree with that, but it was probably one of the bravest things that I've done, because it's one thing to have a story, it's another thing to write it down and put it out there for people to read, and to maybe criticise or appreciate, or whatever the case may be. So it's really, for me, it was never about being, having a bestseller or being touted as being a good writer, because I don't think I am a particularly good writer. I think I'm a competent writer, but it was more about the power of the story and about having Edna Walsh's name talked about for my granddaughter, because my granddaughter's 6 now. And so what a beautiful thing when she's 96, which is like 2099, and she'll be talking to people about her great-great-grandmother who was born in 1909. So it's almost like a 200-year space of women talking about women in their family, which I think is a good thing.
Beautiful, mate. I've again turned, talking about Shakespearean, I'm just going to, page 222 on guilt. Guilt hunts me in many forms. There's the guilt of having difficulty connecting to a dead father I didn't know, particularly given I had a fantastic stepfather who I did. The guilt of not being the uncle all my uncles were to my brother and me. There existed deep guilt about feeling angry within the universe when my brother Jeff passed away. This was a time when I really needed to be more present. There is guilt at not being able to speak at his funeral. The relieved guilt of living a long and happy life. The hex of guilt in being the younger who lived. Wow, that's powerful.
sounds more powerful when you read it.
Wow.
Well, yeah. Well, wow. That does
Guilt
sound.
guilt is a strong, dark magic. It leaves a jagged scar on the forehead and can lead to less than perfect behavior. It can be a strong foundation stone upon which to build an entire jailhouse. Pretty soon, one can live within the walls of regret, with no room to move and little chance of escape. Heavy. The good news is, if it's true, we have more in common than which makes us different. Perhaps we're all composed of good and bad. So for all of my guilt-edged poor behavior, I apologize and seek to let it go. Wow. Would you like to comment on that? It's almost therapy.
Yeah. I guess I wrote that largely because I didn't want people to think I was the hero of the book. The hero of this book is Edna Walsh.
Yeah.
And I remember my wife and I were having a glass of wine once, and we talked about this, and I value her opinion greatly because, again, she sees things that I don't see way before they're an issue. And she said, "Are you concerned that you might be seen as the hero of this book?" And I said, "Yeah, well, I am, but clearly I'm not." And she said, "Yeah, but that may happen." So I thought, because when I finished the book, two people, Brian Dawson was one, my mate, and another one was my brother, Uncle Doug, and they both said the same thing. "Gee, this must have been cathartic." And I said, "No, it wasn't cathartic. It wasn't cathartic at all. It's just just telling the story." But now that I've finished the book, and I think that chapter's at the core of it, I fully accept this has been a cathartic experience to some extent. Because when you're young, all you really want to do is just be like your mates. You just want to get on. You don't want to give it any more energy than it needs, and you just want to be just like everybody else and just make your way in the world. So, one thing that I have learned is that most of us have that inner voice that kind of is a negative self-talk voice. And one of the things that I've learned more recently with some coaching work that I've done when I was at South Metro Health Unit with Fiona Stanley Hospital and Fremantle Hospital was I learned from some coaching facilitation that happened was that you will never ever get rid of that negative self-talk. Everybody has negative self-talk, and part of mine was a bit of guilt stuff around, why am I the one of a nuclear family of 4? I'm the last Mohican, and why do I deserve that? And all the negative self-talk that goes on. And one of the things I learned was that rather than trying to squash it, you just have to acknowledge that it's always going to be there. And the best way to turn the volume knob down on your negative self-talk is to give thanks and to show gratitude. And I guess it gets back to when I was saying the one word around this book is gratitude. So I've actually dialed down the guilt factor considerably, and by writing the book and by reminding myself when I go swimming every morning when I'm about to jump into that beautiful ocean, just giving thanks for all the things that we have here in Perth and WA and the Indian Ocean and all the great things that we have. And so it does sound heavy, but I don't want people to worry about it. It's just I think we've all got it. And one thing my grandmother taught me, and I don't know how she taught me this, but obviously we're all born and we all die. And in the middle, somehow she taught us all that the world's job is to try and to knock you down. Your job is to get up, dust yourself off, and go again. And I think that role clarification is really important. And sometimes that the world gets inside your head and it's a negative self-talk. So whether it's guilt or regret or whatever the case may be, but we need to process. We have to be tough enough to process that and get it behind us, and then take that step on and keep on moving on. Because guess what's going to happen down the track? The world's going to knock you down again. So it's not, you're not going to solve it in one go. You just have to keep going. You know where you want to go and keep going towards it. And I'm not sure how she taught us all that message, but I suspect it was largely through the role modeling that she provided every day.
Just demonstrate through her own behaviour. Absolutely. Well, on the other side, still on page 223, fortunately, wittingly or not, the Walsh family managed to provide me with optimism. According to explorer Ernest Shackleton, optimism was the first quality on his recruitment list when selecting a team for his life-threatening polar adventures. Ernest packed optimism in his kit and didn't leave base camp without it. Considering Shackleton's other criteria were patience, physical endurance, idealism, and lastly, courage, I reckon Gran may well have been offered a position on his team.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful, mate. There's just so much in there. And what is it? He placed a high value on optimism over 100 years. At the time, our Pop Walsh was preparing to negotiate that tricky hill in Gallipoli. Regardless, thanks to Edna. And then Voltaire, who I love as a philosopher also, every man is guilty of all the good he didn't do. Oh boy. Man, that's a hard-hitting sentence too, isn't it? Every man is guilty of all the good he didn't do. It keeps the challenge going. It keeps the challenge going. Mate, it is a fantastic read, folks. And as you say, it's just such a great documentation of resilience. Here's a quote: "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, young fella." It's all there.
Well, I guess for me too, because for those people who know me, I was a teacher to start off with, and then I went to Department of Health, and I was involved in, I was the Fine 30 campaign director, all that sort of stuff. And I was the manager for health promotion for many years, both at South Metro Health Service and also Heart Foundation WA. So ironically, I guess somehow my early life experiences were the bit that I was marching to, was to try and make the world a healthier place, some way. And it gets back to what Edna taught us, is like, know where you want to go and just get on with it. And one of her great sayings was, make yourself useful, young fella. So make yourself useful. And it wasn't make yourself useful for you. It was make yourself useful for your family and for your community.
For other people.
And it's one of the reasons why I love getting down and swing with the pod down at Cottesloe most mornings, because it's just a great community event. And, it's a way of keeping fit yourself, but it's also a way you can keep an eye on others around in your community, which is fantastic.
Mate, it's just incredible. I mean, there it was this morning. Jamie's just come down. He buried his father 2 days ago. We all put our arms around him. I know just that event, let alone, people are going through cancer and marriage breakups, and then there's births and a whole range of life experiences. But again, Jeff Watson, and with all the work that we did with the concept of social support, the social support systems, it's like, talk about, if guilt is a killer, loneliness is such a killer as well. The whole concept of social support. So let's just talk about a couple of things which we've semi-touched on. So if I said to you, Richard Crane, what motivates you? What motivates you and why?
Oh, what motivates me? Well, I know it's motivated me from a young age. Even in primary school, before I even hit high school, I remember thinking to myself, I knew that there was this big story, there was this big elephant in the room. Oftentimes, when I see young kids with their mums and dads, and I didn't have that situation. I was growing up in a totally different household, and there was, in fact, I remember this one specific time I was we were going shopping in Belvedere shops, and my grandmother, who was so well connected, and you mentioned that word connection, she was connected to a family, to a community, to the old ladies in the suburbs, and there were two old ladies who seemed ancient to me. They're probably about my age now, but they seemed ancient to me. And so she stopped us and said, "Boys, say hello to Auntie Rosie and Auntie I can't remember the lady's name." And she said to them, "Girls, these are Margie's boys." So obviously they knew my mother when she was a young girl and a young woman, because she died at 26, as did my father. And straight away they went from smiling faces to this sad look of pity, and their eyes turned from being bright and happy to being like sad glue that just seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the conversation. And I remember looking up thinking, I don't want that, I don't need that, and that's not going to be my story. So from a very early age, I made the decision that my story was going to be a happy story. And it might not be, and I live happy ever after, but it certainly wasn't going to be a tragic story, because I figured we'd had enough of that in the family. And sadly, when my brother passed away at 38 years of age with a cardiac arrest, that was a bit of a setback, because I hadn't kind of had that in my consciousness, or in the plan, if you like. But even when that's the world trying to knock you down. So you get up again, you go again. So here I am at 66, and I'm still going well. I'm fit and healthy, and I've got a lot to be thankful for. But I guess my why is, I need to turn the story that's taken my mother and my father and my brother, and turn this into a positive story, a good story, a healthy story, a story with some humor and some learnings.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Well, and of course, hopefully this podcast helps with that. And obviously, we've talked about mentoring in terms of Gran, and obviously your uncles or brother uncles. Who are some of the other mentors in your life, that through your sporting or teaching or work career or outside of work, people who've had a significant impact on your thinking and your behaviour? Who are some of those people, and what are some of the things you learned from them?
Well, I'll start with Big Jeff. So Big Jeff, if you recall, was my dad's best mate, and he married my mum, and then only spent, sadly, tragically, 3 months with her. So when we were in Belmont, he was a young man still. So he went and had a milk round. Then he got enough money to buy a block in Chillow. He became a chook farmer. He had to build the farm from scratch. So we'd go up every weekend. So he'd come down, pick us up an hour, drive back an hour. And we go there when we were very small for one night, then we were a bit bigger for 2 nights, and we helped him build the chook farm. So he taught us how to drill and how to cut timber, and how to go to a hardware store and get the best timber, and how to mix cement, and then collect the eggs and feed the chooks and kill the chooks when they're sick, all that sort of stuff. And he was such a measured, reliable, steady, gentle. He was just a gentleman. He was an absolute gentleman, and it's been a real. Just this last few weeks, he's been in excellent health. So the last few months, he's had a couple of falls, and he's 94. He has dementia. So it's been great to be able to pay him back to an extent by making sure he's safe and in a good place and being cared for. So I asked him. I remember I asked him a couple of years ago. I took him out for Father's Day when we were sitting down having bacon and eggs or whatever, and I said to him, "What advice do you think I need to give my kids that maybe came from your dad, or what advice would you give me?" And he thought about it for a moment, and he said, "Be quick to help others."
Oh wow!
And even though he's really at a stage where he's really slowed up mentally and anything else, he was very clear on that. And so that's, I think, a really good message for men to give younger men, and for me then obviously to give my boys and not just boys and girls and other people in the family. So he was a huge influence, and particularly when we were on the farm, because my brother was pretty good with all the manual work. I was not so good, but he always just say to me, "The man who's never made a mistake has never made anything." So he was very tolerant in that regard. So I'd say that he would be a big person. Brian Dawson, who is pretty quiet, but as you know, he's together with Hayden Button and John Todd, he's the only successful Swan District's premiership coach at league level in 2010 when he took the mighty Black and Whites to the premiership.
Yeah, great coaching.
Yeah, but also my wife. My wife is, I think I mentioned it before. I'm very lucky that we met, and very lucky that she's chosen to spend a life with me and give us both 3 beautiful children. But it's also about really listening deeply to what they have to say, even when you think you've got a good comment to make, or it's all about the timing. It's so much about the timing, and then go away and think about it, and then come back before you respond, because invariably she sees things better than I do. And I guess if my life's vision is to make the world a healthier place, her life, she makes the world a more creative and a more beautiful place, just with the things that she does. And
Beautiful, man.
It's not my skill set, but I'm glad it's in my life.
So she chose the painting behind you, or she did that painting?
Absolutely. No, well, she does paint. That she chose that one, but
Nice.
she's quite talented. Yeah.
Beautiful, mate. Beautiful. She makes the world a more beautiful place. That's lovely. In terms of books, I always like to ask my people I'm interviewing, my guests, what books are you reading? What books are you reading at the moment? And what are some of the books that have really impacted you?
Well, the one I'm reading at the moment is about Angela Merkel, who's the Chancellor for Germany.
Germany, yeah.
I'm only a little way into it, but she was a fascinating story. She was my favourite politician in a world of pretenders and a world of people who were very big on the talk but lacking substance. But she was, in my view, a world leader who was really credible and really had authenticity in what she said and did and acted on. And the book that I think probably, and we've kind of touched on this book a little bit before earlier, there's a book about Shackleton, who went down in 1914 down to the South Pole, had 27 men. The boat was caught in an ice floe and crushed, went to the bottom, and in 3 wooden tubs that, something about the size of what we see down in Cottesloe at the surf club, he got all 27 men back to safety. And I'd recommend it as a read for anyone who wants to learn about resilience or about it's just a fantastic read of about optimism and about leadership and about let's just get this done. And all 27 men that he took down there, it took 2 years to get them back through hurricanes and across the Southern Ocean in three open boats. It's just an incredible tale. I could bore you for hours on Shackleton. He's an absolute hero of mine.
No, you motivated me. You were telling me about that in the change room yesterday or the day before. So I'm going to get onto that and have a read. As you say, what a story. 2 years, 27 lives saved. So in terms of the future for you, Craney, what does the future look like? What are some of your plans for the future? What's next for you?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question because towards my end of, I've just retired from work in the health sector after 20 years, and as I said, Heart Foundation WA and South Metro Health Service. And towards the end, I was really grateful. Kate Gaddy, who was my boss, asked me to do some coaching, professional development, and I was a reluctant kind of participant initially because I thought, what's in this for me, or not what's in this for me, but I think I've done a fair bit of coaching through kids sport and all the rest of the phys ed degree. And I thought I kind of knew as much as I needed to know about it, but I was blown away when I went because she insisted I go to it. And it was totally different to what I thought. But it's all about entering into a creative process with your clients to maximize their future potential. And the way that it was done, Jenny Edis was one of the facilitators. So I'm now a member of the International Coaching Federation. And as of the 1st of July 2024, so just over a month's time or 2 months' time, I'm going to become a practicing coach, a life coach in Western Australia. So
fantastic, mate.
I'm really excited about it because one of the things when I started to explore the whole coaching arena, one of the things that the feedback that I was getting, and here's an example of growing up in a working class suburb like Belmont, is that tall poppy syndrome pops up. So whenever you get positive feedback, I don't know if you suffer in this case at all, but whenever I realize that whenever I get positive feedback, I tend to just bat it away and I don't really look at it. I just sort of say, oh yeah, well, yeah. And you sort of downplay it all the time. And the incredible thing when we started doing this course, and there were a couple of courses involved, and they were like weeks long. We had homework, and you'd have to actually coach each other, go through this coaching role play type scenarios. And invariably, people were saying to me, "Richard, you're really good at this," and I'd just go, "Yeah." Well. Then the next person, "Richard, that was a really good question. I'm going to use that. Thanks for that. I really appreciate it." So I batted away. And then there was one time when the person was coaching me, and I started to think, well, maybe I could actually do some coaching, like when I retire. And so I used that as one of my scenarios. And the person who was coaching me said, so Richard, what you're telling me is people think you're really, really good at this coaching caper. And I said, yeah. And she said, and she used the what if question on me. And she said, what if what the people are saying is true? And it just, it opened a door in my mind like that, where there's a little glimmer of light, it just let through the sunshine. And I thought, yeah, well, of course I could do coaching. So again, it's about that negative self-talk and working hard to turn the volume down on your negative self-talk and really opening up yourself up to the possibilities and using curiosity to really make your life, as you would say, optimizing your life, or being your best version of yourself.
Beautiful,
so
mate.
I'm really excited about it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, that's part of what PDC is. There's a community of coaches and consultants in the business of performance development. And so if you go to the PDC website, and I'll send you the link, we're talking about coaching in both government and commercial areas. And of course, I can't do it all, but what I want to do is to facilitate others going in and making a difference, whether it be leadership or life coaching. We've got women in business coaching. We've got customer services, a whole range. But basically, as you've experienced yourself, the power and the value of high quality coaching or constructive coaching, because as you say, everyone's dealing with these two voices. The Indians talk about the two wolves, which wolf are you feeding? Because be careful which one you feed, because they're going to grow and get stronger. So well done, mate. Well, we'll talk about that offline. See if we can help you with that. So we've talked a bit. You swim every morning, and in terms of routines and health, what are some of the other things you do on a daily or weekly basis to optimize your own life?
Well, I guess particularly having at the minute we're really taking care of Big Jeff because he's at the end of life and that stage. And what it's really made very clear to me, it's become very lucid to me, is that family's important, your health's important, and the time that you have, the quality of the time that you have is important. So they become three pretty important resources going forward. And so we have a daughter and a granddaughter in Melbourne. So Nancy and I will be going across and making sure we stay connected with them as she grows up. She's 6 years old, and hopefully try and get some of the Edna wisdom embedded into our young granddaughter. That's one thing that gives me great pleasure. Nancy and I enjoy gardening at home, and supporting Nancy's painting and her artistic endeavours. But really the thing for me that really just makes me feel on top of the world is getting up at 5 a.m, doing a little bit of housework just so Nancy can get up to a nice house, and going down swimming in that beautiful Indian Ocean. That just, it sets me up for a day that it's kind of like, well, I'm okay now what can I do for my family and for my community?
Yeah, brilliant, mate. And we say to people, it's that serotonin and the dopamine that we get doing the exercise, but also that sense of that connection and the giggles and the laughs and all the things that go on in that group, that social support system that we have, mate. We've covered a whole lot of things, and of course I've got some of the key things: be quick to help others, gratitude, resilience, Shackleton. You've said many times here, I'm very lucky, I'm very lucky, I'm very fortunate. I think of that Rod Stewart song, luck is believing you're lucky. And gratitude, it's like what we focus on is what we manifest more of, and therefore taking responsibility. And some of those mantras, whether it be mantras that your grand put in your head, or these mantras you're talking about, and I'm lucky. And again, we talk the power of that what if you didn't fail? What if you were going to be successful and could create the life you wanted? What would that look like? It's beautiful, mate. So is there anything we haven't talked about you'd like to talk about before we move into the home straight?
Probably the only other thing I'd say with my grandmother is that even though my grandmother wasn't a particularly funny person herself, she loved humour in the house, and boys were brilliant at it. Their ability, particularly when in a poor neighbourhood, when there's not a lot of resources, not a lot of money. What my uncles taught me, when they walked in the door, they'd have a joke, they'd have a smile, they'd have a funny story that brings something. So, and again, it wasn't articulated as such, but just by watching the way that they behaved, it was expected that you're going to walk in with with some verve, something positive. And that invariably came from my grandmother.
Isn't that fantastic? You say bring something. I've heard of people talk about bring good energy, but even as you say, and you see this in Pod Squad, Shane McGurk, there's about 5 different guys bring a joke in one form or another. And what that then does in terms of lifting the energy and the connectivity of the group is quite powerful. So I love that as a routine or responsibility. I'm going to bring something good into the house. I'm going to bring something good into our community. Mate, and as you say, humor is such a fantastic thing to bring into the place. So how do people get a copy of this book, Craney? Where can they go to get a copy of it?
If they would like to, it's if you just type in "because of her book," all one word, lowercase, becauseofherbook.com. It'll take you straight to the ordering site. So that's easy. If you forget that, if you just go "because of her Richard Crane," I'm sure something will pop up and follow the prompts.
Right.
And particularly if you have someone, I guess if there's a call to action from me, it's not about necessarily buying the book, but the call to action. I think this would be a great book for Mother's Day, for example, which has just gone past. And we always have a spike in sales come Mother's Day. But if there's an older person, particularly in your tribe, if you buy them that book or buy them another book or do something that just sort of says, hey, you've been an important person in my life. Because when I speak to older women, and even women my age, they say that they tend to become invisible as they become older. And the reality from my perspective is that they see even more. There's such great, oftentimes untapped resources in our community library. So by just do what you can to actually make a woman in your social environment, in your tribe, feel like they are worthwhile and validated and respected, and it'll be a good thing. It can only have good reverberations around the place.
Great, good waves, mate. Richard considers himself extremely fortunate to share this story of Edna, a woman who made the world a better place. Tony, you've done a marvelous job in putting this together, and this interview today, we can create some positive ripples and make the world a better place, sharing some of Edna's thoughts and philosophy across to however many people watch this. Mate, it's been a productive time. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you down the beach tomorrow or the next day, will I?
I'll be there tomorrow.
Thanks, mate. See you then.
Okay. Thanks. Appreciate your time, Leigh. Thank you.
Pleasure, mate. Bye.